If you study history long enough, you begin to realize something unsettling. Power rarely shouts. It whispers. It moves quietly beneath the surface, rearranging the board while others argue about the pieces. When we speak of taking down enemies, most imagine open confrontation, raised voices, dramatic endings, and explosive moments that feel cinematic and satisfying. But the most effective victories are silent. They happen long before the opponent realizes a war has even begun. The greatest strategists understood that visible conflict is often the final stage of a battle already won in the shadows. Influence shifts in small, nearly invisible increments. Reputations are shaped quietly. Alliances form without spectacle. Meanwhile, those who crave noise mistake activity for progress. Real power understands patience, positioning, and psychological leverage. It knows that loud dominance invites resistance, but quiet recalibration goes unnoticed until it is irreversible. By the time the opponent senses something has changed, the terrain beneath them has already shifted. Their footing is unstable. Their certainty has dissolved. The victory is not dramatic, it is decisive, and most unsettling of all. It feels almost effortless to the one who prepared for it in silence. The first silent but deadly way to take down your enemies is mastery of self. This may sound unimpressive, almost anticlimactic in a world addicted to spectacle, but it is devastating in its effectiveness. Most people defeat themselves long before anyone else does. They are ruled by anger that flares without warning, ego that demands validation, impulse that sabotages long-term vision, and pride that refuses correction. Emotional reactivity makes a person predictable. Predictability makes them vulnerable. When you refuse to react emotionally, you become unreadable. And an unreadable person is dangerous because they cannot be manipulated through simple triggers. Your enemy expects rage. They expect retaliation. They expect to see the flicker of offense in your eyes. Instead, give them composure. Give them measured silence. In psychology, unpredictability unsettles the human nervous system. Calm restraint forces them into overthinking, and overthinking leads to mistakes. They begin questioning whether their tactics are working. Doubt creeps in. Meanwhile, you remain grounded, steady, and internally aligned. Mastery of self shifts you from being reactive to being strategic. It turns your inner world into disciplined territory, immune to invasion. Self-mastery also denies your enemy their greatest weapon: provocation. Many conflicts escalate because one side cannot endure insult without response. The need to defend pride instantly becomes the doorway through which manipulation enters. But when you train yourself to pause, observe, and respond strategically rather than emotionally, you shift from being a participant to being a chess player studying the board. You are no longer consumed by the moment, you are analyzing it. Philosophically, this is the difference between being controlled by circumstance and shaping circumstance. The reactive person becomes a puppet to external stimuli. The disciplined person becomes the architect of outcomes. Your silence becomes a mirror in which your opponent sees their own instability reflected back at them. Their aggression looks louder when contrasted against your calm. Their impatience appears childish beside your patience. Over time, the imbalance becomes obvious, not just to you, but to observers as well. You do not need to expose them, they expose themselves. And nothing unsettles an aggressor more than realizing their emotional weapons have no target. The second way is control of perception. Understand this clearly: people rarely fight reality, they fight narratives. The human mind is wired to interpret, label, and construct meaning around events. Reputation, image, and influence are subtle currencies, often more powerful than force itself. If your enemy believes they are undermining you, yet the world sees you as steady, competent, and unshaken, their attacks lose oxygen. They shout into a room that refuses to echo. Humans are social creatures, deeply influenced by collective opinion and social proof. When others consistently witness your composure and reliability, a protective layer forms around you. Perception shapes allegiance. It shapes trust. It shapes opportunity. If you cultivate a reputation rooted in integrity and consistency, your adversary must work twice as hard to distort it, and distortion becomes increasingly difficult when your behavior remains aligned over time. The narrative you embody quietly overrides the narrative they attempt to spread. Eventually, their version feels exaggerated while yours feels authentic. Perception, when mastered, becomes armor that requires no announcement. Control of perception does not mean deception. It means intentional presentation. It means understanding that every public reaction becomes part of your story. It means speaking less, but meaning more. It means refusing to over-explain, because excessive defense often signals insecurity. When you never defend yourself emotionally in public, you communicate confidence without stating it outright. Defense signals vulnerability. Restraint signals strength. When others witness calm confidence under pressure, sympathy shifts toward you almost instinctively. Humans admire steadiness in chaos. They gravitate toward those who appear internally anchored. Over time, your enemy begins fighting alone, misunderstood, and increasingly frustrated. Their emotional intensity contrasts sharply with your poise. Isolation weakens resolve more effectively than direct confrontation ever could. When someone realizes they are not gaining support or reaction, their energy begins to drain. Frustration clouds judgment, and in that clouded judgment, errors emerge. Meanwhile, your consistency continues building silent credibility. You do not chase approval, you allow it to accumulate naturally. Perception becomes less about image and more about disciplined presence. The third silent strategy is patience. Impulsive people reveal themselves quickly. They leak information through emotional expression. They expose insecurity through rushed decisions. Patient people, on the other hand, collect information. They observe without announcing their observations. Every person has patterns, habits, triggers, blind spots, cycles of behavior. But patterns are only visible to those who wait long enough to see repetition. Patience is psychological warfare in its purest form, because it allows you to act at the precise moment of greatest leverage. Acting too soon often strengthens opposition by alerting them. Acting too late can forfeit opportunity, but acting at the right moment collapses resistance quietly and efficiently. Patience also communicates confidence. It signals that you are not desperate for immediate resolution. You trust timing, you trust preparation, and in that trust, you gain clarity. While others rush to assert dominance, you are studying weaknesses, mapping dynamics, and understanding the terrain. By the time you move, your action appears minimal, but its impact is amplified by preparation. Philosophically, patience reflects an understanding of time as an ally rather than an enemy. Many people perceive delay as loss. They panic when results are not immediate. But the disciplined strategist understands that time reveals what force cannot. Your enemy may rush to prove dominance, driven by insecurity or urgency. But urgency breeds error. It shortens perspective. It narrows judgment. When you wait, observe, and gather insight, you begin to understand their fears, ambitions, and weaknesses in depth. You see where their confidence is authentic and where it is fragile. You notice what they protect most fiercely. You do not need to attack directly. You simply apply pressure where they are already unstable. The smallest push at the right moment can accomplish what brute force never could. Time magnifies existing cracks. You merely align yourself with the moment those cracks widen. In doing so, you conserve energy while they exhaust theirs. Patience becomes not inactivity, but precision disguised as stillness. The fourth method is strategic absence. Sometimes the most powerful move is withdrawal. In a world obsessed with visibility and constant engagement, stepping back can feel counterintuitive. Yet withdrawal, when intentional, shifts the emotional gravity of a situation. When you remove your attention, your validation, or your participation, you disrupt the dynamic entirely. Many conflicts are fueled not by hatred, but by engagement. Your enemy thrives on reaction, on the exchange of energy, on the validation that their presence still affects you. When you deny them that reaction, you deny them relevance. And irrelevance is a quiet defeat that strikes deeper than confrontation. Strategic absence is not avoidance born of fear. It is detachment born of awareness. You recognize that some battles are sustained only by your willingness to stand in them. Once you step away, the conflict collapses under its own weight. The opponent who relied on your presence to justify their aggression is left shadow boxing, fighting a silhouette that no longer stands before them. Psychologically, absence creates uncertainty, and uncertainty unsettles the human mind more than hostility ever could. Humans are wired to seek closure, to resolve tension, to understand outcomes. When you disengage without explanation, your opponent is left constructing narratives in their own mind. And the mind, when deprived of information, often fills silence with insecurity. Doubt creeps in quietly. They begin questioning their strategy, their assumptions, even their perceived strength. Was their influence overstated? Did they miscalculate your reaction? Silence forces reflection, and reflection can weaken those who rely solely on aggression to feel powerful. In many cases, your withdrawal becomes more disruptive than retaliation would have been. Retaliation confirms conflict. Silence erodes certainty. The absence of feedback destabilizes the aggressor's internal compass. They cannot measure success because there is no visible response. Over time, their energy disperses, their confidence wavers, and the intensity they once projected begins to dissipate into self-doubt. Yet there is a deeper layer to all of this. Taking down an enemy is not always about destroying them. It is about outgrowing them. Destruction requires force. Growth requires discipline. When you elevate your skills, sharpen your mind, refine your habits, and expand your influence, you change the terrain entirely. Suddenly, you are no longer competing in the same arena. What once felt like rivalry now feels like distance. Your growth alters the scale of the conflict. The hostility that once seemed threatening begins to feel small in comparison to your expanding vision. This is perhaps the most refined form of victory: transcendence. You do not eliminate your opponent, you render them irrelevant by rising beyond their reach. The energy once spent countering them is reinvested into becoming formidable in your own right. And as your competence deepens, so does your confidence. In this way, growth becomes both shield and sword, protecting your peace while quietly establishing superiority. Consider how insecurity drives most opposition. People attack what threatens their identity, status, or fragile sense of control. When someone perceives your competence, confidence, or potential as a threat to their position, hostility often follows. If you respond by shrinking, dimming your light, or compromising your growth to ease their discomfort, they win without effort. But if you respond by evolving, by sharpening your craft, strengthening your discipline, and expanding your influence, they are forced to confront their own stagnation. Growth exposes mediocrity without uttering a word. It highlights contrast. It magnifies the gap between effort and complacency, and that contrast can be more painful to an insecure person than direct confrontation. You do not need to accuse them. Your progress speaks on your behalf. Your consistency becomes an unspoken comparison. And in that comparison, they either rise to meet the standard or remain where they are, increasingly aware of the distance between you. Another subtle tactic lies in selective alliances. Power rarely stands alone. It is reinforced by networks of trust and mutual benefit. When you build strong relationships rooted in respect, competence, and shared values, you create a quiet infrastructure of support. Your enemy may attempt to undermine you, but influence spreads through connection. Humans trust those who are vouched for by others. Reputation multiplies when echoed across relationships. Selective alliances are not about collecting people for display, they are about cultivating meaningful bonds that withstand pressure. When others see that you are trusted by capable individuals, attacks against you lose credibility. Your alliances act as a shield, often discouraging aggression before it begins. Furthermore, strong networks provide perspective, counsel, and opportunity, advantages that isolation cannot offer. The one who stands alone is easier to destabilize. The one who stands supported by quiet loyalty is far more difficult to displace. Notice how none of these strategies rely on loud retaliation or public spectacle. They rely on understanding human nature at its core. People fear losing control over their environment. They fear social rejection and public embarrassment. They fear becoming irrelevant or unseen. When you remain composed, respected, patient, and independent, you trigger those fears without direct aggression. That is why these methods are deadly. They strike at the psychological foundation rather than the surface. Instead of attacking behavior, you influence perception and internal stability. Instead of escalating conflict, you create contrast. The aggressor begins to feel unstable, not because you fought harder, but because you refuse to engage on their terms. They expect drama, you offer discipline. They expect noise, you provide stillness. The psychological imbalance becomes increasingly uncomfortable for them, and discomfort, when sustained, erodes confidence far more effectively than confrontation ever could. There is also the art of allowing consequences to unfold naturally. Sometimes your enemy will sabotage themselves if given enough space and time. Intervening too quickly can actually rescue them from the consequences of their own behavior. When you resist the urge to interfere, defend, or expose prematurely, you allow their character to reveal itself publicly and organically. Patterns surface. Contradictions emerge. Inconsistencies become visible, and character once exposed is difficult to defend because it reflects a pattern rather than a single mistake. This approach requires discipline because it demands trust in process over impulse. You must tolerate temporary discomfort for long-term clarity. Yet when the consequences finally unfold, they carry greater weight precisely because they appear self-generated. You did not orchestrate their downfall, you simply stepped aside and allowed gravity to function. In doing so, you maintain your integrity, while the natural outcome of their choices becomes evident to everyone watching. Philosophically, this approach reflects faith in cause and effect. It reflects an understanding that actions carry consequences whether or not we rush to enforce them. Every decision plants a seed. Some seeds bloom quickly, others take time to surface. If you remain principled while your opponent acts recklessly, time itself becomes your advocate. You do not need to chase vindication, you align yourself with reality and allow it to unfold. Impulsive aggression often accelerates short-term dominance, but weakens long-term stability. Integrity, on the other hand, compounds quietly. When someone operates through manipulation, deception, or insecurity, the structural weaknesses in their behavior eventually reveal themselves. You do not need to push. Gravity will do the work. The higher they climb through unstable tactics, the further they fall when those tactics are exposed. Trusting cause and effect requires patience and restraint, but it preserves your clarity. It ensures that when outcomes finally manifest, they feel inevitable rather than forced. It is important to remember that silence does not mean passivity. It does not mean weakness, surrender, or fear. Silence, when strategic, is compressed strength. It means intention without noise. It means moving deliberately while appearing still. Many people confuse quietness with fragility because they equate volume with authority. But true authority rarely needs to raise its voice. Quiet strength unsettles because it suggests depth, and depth implies capability. The deeper the water, the calmer the surface. Beneath stillness lies calculation, awareness, and readiness. When you operate in this way, others cannot easily measure you. They cannot determine your next move. They cannot provoke visible cracks. That uncertainty alone creates psychological tension. Meanwhile, you conserve energy. You choose your words sparingly. You act only when necessary. Your silence becomes presence rather than absence. A controlled field of awareness that makes impulsive aggression appear chaotic and unsophisticated by comparison. There is a moral dimension to consider as well. When you rely on intelligence rather than cruelty, you protect your own integrity. Revenge, fueled by rage, may offer temporary satisfaction, but it often leaves residue, guilt, regret, or the erosion of self-respect. Victory achieved through reckless harm tends to wound both sides. But victory achieved through discipline, composure, and wisdom strengthens character rather than compromising it. You remain aligned with your values while still protecting your interests. This alignment matters because internal conflict is far more corrosive than external opposition. If defeating an enemy requires you to abandon your principles, the cost may outweigh the reward. Strategic restraint allows you to win without becoming what you oppose. It ensures that when the dust settles, you recognize yourself. In this way, the silent path is not only effective, it is sustainable. It safeguards both your reputation and your conscience. In many ways, the ultimate defeat of an enemy is their realization that they no longer have power over your emotional state. Emotional control is often the true objective behind hostility. When someone can provoke you, they can influence you. When they can influence you, they can destabilize you. But when you become untouchable internally, when your sense of worth, direction, and identity is no longer dependent on their approval or reaction, external attacks lose significance. Your composure becomes your fortress. And fortresses built within are far harder to breach than those constructed externally. The aggressor begins to sense that their efforts are ineffective. Their words no longer sting. Their tactics no longer disrupt. The psychological leverage they once held dissolves. What remains is imbalance, an aggressor exerting energy with diminishing return. The moment they recognize they cannot move you emotionally, the conflict shifts irreversibly in your favor. The paradox is this: the more you focus on your own mastery, the less you need to focus on defeating others. Obsession with enemies drains attention from growth. But when you redirect that attention toward refining your discipline, expanding your knowledge, and strengthening your emotional intelligence, something shifts. Your enemies diminish in importance. Their presence becomes background noise rather than central focus. Psychological superiority replaces physical confrontation. You are no longer reacting to them, they are reacting to your advancement. The battlefield dissolves because you have elevated beyond it. This shift transforms conflict into perspective. What once felt threatening becomes instructive. What once felt personal becomes trivial. Your energy returns to you. And in reclaiming that energy, you gain momentum that no opposition can easily obstruct. Mastery becomes self-sustaining. So if you must take down an enemy, do it without spectacle. Do it without dramatic declarations or visible hostility. Master yourself so thoroughly that provocation finds no entrance. Shape perception through consistent integrity. Practice patience until timing aligns with precision. Wield absence when engagement only feeds conflict. Grow beyond their reach until rivalry becomes irrelevant. In the end, the most powerful victories are invisible. They happen in the mind first, in habits formed quietly, in discipline practiced when no one is watching. By the time the world notices the outcome, the battle has long been decided internally. There is no need for applause, no need for validation. The board has already been rearranged, and your opponent, unaware of when the shift occurred, stands in a position that no longer favors them. That is the essence of silent power, unseen, deliberate, and ultimately decisive. This is the Golden Circle Philosophy channel. Like the video, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more videos like this one. Thank you for watching.